Hi Beth, and hello to everyone watching. We're going to be having a bit of a conversation about emotions, and especially how our emotions can sometimes overwhelm us and seem to be out of all proportion with the circumstances that trigger them. Beth, why have you chosen this particular moment to share some of your own experiences?
Hey Alan, thank you. So I figured that during this time of lockdown, there were possibly people that had more time with their thoughts, started overthinking things a bit maybe, and I was in a similar situation last year where I was living by myself and I was working in the evenings, so it was quite hard to have contact with people and connect with people, and I had a lot of time to myself that I hadn't really had before. And I started getting quite confused about some of my emotions that I was having and some of the things that I was thinking. So I thought that I could maybe share some of my experiences with you guys and to basically try and give some ideas of what I found helped. I felt nudged by God in the past few days to share this, which feels a bit strange to me, but hopefully it will help.
That's very brave. It always feels risky to open up and talk about our vulnerabilities in case people don't understand or may even judge us. I've shared a bit recently about some of my struggles with anxiety, and I'd be fascinated to know about your experiences, particularly with sadness and anger. And I believe that there was one particular incident that alerted you to the fact that something strange was going on.
Yeah, so there were quite a few times where my emotions didn't really seem to match what was going on, and I was getting quite confused about how they linked to the situation. A particular incident that I remember quite well is when I'd made a roast dinner, I'd made some Yorkshire puddings, got them out of the oven, one of the oven gloves slipped and I dropped my Yorkshire puddings on the floor, and I was distraught. I sat on the floor for like 20 to 30 minutes just crying, and those of you that know me probably don't find that such a strange thought because I get quite emotional about food in general. But even for me, like, this was a bit weird. It was quite a shock that I was that overwhelmed with emotion by just dropping some Yorkshire puddings on the floor. And I'm pretty sure I ate them anyway, so it really wasn't a big deal. And things like this sort of started happening more frequently, and I really was getting quite confused. So I decided to go and get some therapy and see a therapist, and it was so helpful. It was a really good decision, and I would definitely recommend that to anybody, whether you're struggling with emotions or not. I learned so much in general just about how humans process things. So I found it really useful, and I would say that the two things that I really took away from that experience was acknowledgement and acceptance.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So you say it's acknowledgement and acceptance. So first of all, can you say a little bit more about what you mean by acknowledgement?
Yeah, so acknowledging our emotions is so important. It can often be hard for us to be honest with ourselves and to admit that we're feeling a certain way, but it's so much better than trying to pretend we're not feeling something and pushing that away, trying to force ourselves to not feel it because it's not making us feel good. It's important to feel those emotions, so it's really important that we just acknowledge it, try and name the emotion if you can, and that way it will make it easier to move forward. We're going to be less likely to have an instant like this Yorkshire pudding instant where the reaction just doesn't really match the situation. And it's worth just saying to yourself or saying to God, okay, that's annoyed me. Interesting. I'm feeling annoyed. And moving on. It may seem weird or obvious, but that's the first step in what we're going to look at today.
So sweeping things under the carpet doesn't help. Then you say that the next thing is acceptance.
Yeah, so we have acknowledged the emotion, we've named the emotion, now we just need to accept the emotion. So it's not worth judging yourself, getting annoyed at yourself for feeling a certain way, because you can't change emotions. You can't change how your body reacts and how you feel. But what you can change is your reaction to that emotion. So I found myself getting annoyed at myself all the time, and that was probably the cause of a lot of my distress, getting annoyed that I felt a certain way. So if, for instance, people were annoying me, I'd then get irritated at myself that I was being annoyed by people, because I was wanting to be as much like Jesus as I could be. I want to love my neighbour, and I was getting overwhelmed and stressed that I couldn't do that easily, and that for some reason my emotions were kind of stopping that from happening. But we need to accept that that's how we feel and then change what we do with that feeling. So we can accept it and acknowledge that feeling, and we can still choose to react to that emotion. Or you can acknowledge and accept that that's how you're feeling and react with an opposite emotion to stop yourself from reacting in a sudden heat of the moment way that maybe is something that you then would judge yourself for. So if you're in the heat of the moment and a situation's quite intense, it might be quite hard to do that all quickly in your brain. But the more you do it in less tense situations, the easier it's going to be, and the better you're going to get at acknowledging your emotions and then being able to accept them and choosing how you react to the emotions. It's going to take time, but everything does that's worth doing, I think. So you've just got to keep at it, keep trying to accept with your whole self. Now, that sounds a bit of a weird term for me, I think, to accept with your whole self, but what I mean by that is not just trying to will yourself in your thoughts and your brain to accept it, but maybe going and sitting, watching a nice view and feeling at peace with God's creation, or maybe lying down in bed, listening to your favourite song, and just trying to use the whole of yourself to accept that that's how you're feeling. Maybe you could write a pros and cons list about how, if you did accept that emotion, what's going to happen after that. Are there good things that could happen? Are there bad things that could happen? Also, it's worth trying to imagine yourself accepting it in the future, which also sounds a bit weird, but if you can try and picture yourself having accepted that, it can really help for you to then begin to accept it in the present. So that's also worth having a go at. And another thing I want to say is that it's just not worth fighting reality, because you can't change it until you've accepted it. So if you're saying, oh, it shouldn't be like this, I don't think this is what I want to be feeling, you then can't change how you're feeling because you've not accepted that that's how you're feeling, if that makes sense. So you've got to accept it in order to be able to change it and make a difference with how you act on that emotion. It can be painful sometimes to accept how you're feeling, because if you're feeling sadness or anger, it can be painful to completely feel that and to have to deal with that. But once you have accepted it and accept that that's how something's made you feel, often a deep sense of calm will follow, so you'll feel a lot more at peace with the situation than if you had just brushed it under the carpet and tried to fight reality and say, no, that is not how I'm feeling, because that is how you're feeling. And you can't change the feeling, but you can change the reaction.
Some people listening might think that accepting our emotions means we can behave as badly as we like. But of course, that's not what you're saying, is it?
Okay, so acceptance definitely doesn't mean approval. You don't have to approve of the emotion that you're feeling, you just need to accept that that's how you're feeling. Because as I said, you can change how you react to the feeling, but you just can't change that feeling. That is how you're feeling. Another thing that's worth considering is how you would give advice to your friends. So often we can be a lot harder on ourselves than we would be when we're giving advice to people that we know. So I've always felt that I've been quite good at giving advice to my friends. I've been quite helpful, I would like to think. And you can give allowances to friends and reassure them in ways that you would never do for yourself. So it's worth taking a step back and thinking, okay, if I were a friend, what advice would I give myself? What would I say to myself to encourage me or to explain how to deal with these emotions? And that can help to realise, actually, I would be giving myself better advice and I wouldn't be as hard on myself. Jesus was great at giving advice, and we can draw on his example. And the more that we are giving advice to our friends and helping our friends with these situations, the easier it's going to become for us to do it to ourselves because we've had the practice.
You've used the example of feeling annoyed with people. Can you just give a few other examples of when it's healthy to accept our emotions?
So my opinion is that it's so important to have a range of emotions. Often people can think that feeling sadness or feeling anger isn't good because it doesn't make us feel good, but it's actually really healthy to feel these things if they're for rational reasons. So for instance, a loved one passes away and you feel sad, that's okay and that's completely natural. You've got to try and deal with that to accept it. However, if you drop Yorkshire puddings on the floor and cry for half an hour, then that is irrational and that makes no sense. So you've got to try and decide whether that emotion is rational or irrational. But it is totally healthy to feel things that don't make us feel good, which seems crazy, but it is. Like another example, being chased by a lion, you feel fearful, but that emotion is helpful because it makes you react in an appropriate way to that situation. Whereas if every time you leave the house you get worried that a lion's going to chase you, then that would be irrational, because that, again, doesn't make sense. It's unlikely that that's going to happen, so to have constant fear of that isn't healthy and is an unhelpful feeling. We can then think about our vulnerability factors to emotions. That's something I want to mention. So a big one for me is hunger. I feel crazy when I'm hungry. My emotions are heightened massively. I'm more irritable. I'm more likely to get sad over something that normally wouldn't make me that sad. Another one is tiredness. That can heighten my emotions as well. So you've got to think about things in our body that might be affecting our brain. So we want to keep our bodies as healthy as we can if we want to keep our brains healthy. Otherwise it's going to be even more of a challenge. There's also the fact of emotions that we become more aware of because they keep happening. So for instance, rejection. If I feel rejected by somebody and then later on in my life I feel rejected again and I feel rejected again and I keep feeling this same emotion of rejection, I'm going to be more overwhelmed by the rejection the more it happens, because it's happening quite often or because it's affected me quite deeply. It depends, it might be a different emotion for you. But also we can think about things that have happened in our past. So things that you haven't acknowledged and you've brushed under the carpet without realising. So an example for me would be that when I was 16, my dad left my mum and I was sad, and after a few months I'd sort of accepted that that's just how it was. I didn't think at all that I felt rejected. I hadn't acknowledged that that's a feeling that I had at all. Whereas last year, when I was the age of 24, I realised actually it had affected me in ways that I hadn't realised. And this is where talking to a professional can really help, because he really helped me unpick where some of my emotions that I felt were not really worth that deep an emotion for that situation, how things from the past had affected how I react to things now. So once you acknowledge that that emotion had happened in the past and that that's how you felt and that you've dealt with that, it then starts to make a lot more sense when you start reacting more naturally to emotions again. So it can be so important to try and talk about these things, talk about situations that have happened, even if you think they aren't relevant and they don't mean anything. They can actually unpick a lot of things that you didn't know about yourself.
Going back to those Yorkshire puddings for a moment, I think you said that was just a trigger, and when we have an out of proportion reaction like that, there's something deeper going on. Could you just say a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so it kind of gets a little bit complicated here, but I basically, as I've said before, I was displaying emotions that I didn't think linked to the situation that was happening, and I found out that this was down to primary and secondary emotions. So the primary emotion is the thing you feel first, and then the secondary emotion is what comes after that. But if you start suppressing that primary emotion so much, you can sort of automatically skip it, so you don't feel it, so you've not acknowledged that that's been there, and you go straight to the secondary emotion. So the best example for me would be that when I was crying a lot of the time, I found out that it was actually a reaction to things that I would feel angry about, and that's just how I was displaying the emotion. But it wasn't making sense to me, because I thought, this is nothing to be sad about, why am I crying? When really I was angry about these things, but I had either suppressed my anger a lot in the past or hadn't really learned how to deal with anger properly, that it had just been skipped and I hadn't felt that primary emotion, which is why I was getting so confused and it didn't seem to really make sense. Again, this is a point where it's potentially useful to speak to a professional, because they can help you understand that a bit more, which was really, helpful for me.
Thanks, that's helpful. You've said a little bit about some of the things that have helped you with all of this. Are there other things that you've found particularly helpful in this process?
Great, absolutely. I'd like to start with exercise. That's something that I found really helpful. Obviously, health professionals talk about it quite a lot, that doing exercise is good for your mental health. The chemicals and hormones that it releases and stuff is good for you. I also think the sense of achievement is really good. So I'm quite unfit. Exercise is something I love to do, but then I got ME and doing exercise was really draining and I couldn't really do it as much. But recently I've started going on long walks, which has been really good for me health-wise, physically and mentally. It sort of helps to subside those overwhelming emotions, and also, as I said, the sense of achievement. When I've gone on a really long walk, I'll feel proud of myself. Also, I think it'd be helpful for us to find something that we're good at, that is a positive thing that we enjoy. I've spent a lot of lockdown trying to learn random facts, which has been very helpful in some quizzes. So like the 50 states of America, the countries in Africa, the capitals of Europe, things that I felt I should know, potentially useless things to know, but I was proud of myself when I've learnt them, and it's not been a complete waste of my time. It's been more useful than sitting and having my thoughts rolling around in my head. It might be something different for you, maybe baking, or I like colouring as well. That's been something that I've done for the past few years when I've not had much energy. Again, that gives you something that you can be proud of, and just something that you can give you some more positive emotions rather than all these negative emotions when you're sat overthinking on your own. Other things that I have found helpful are mindfulness activities. So I like to talk to God when I do them rather than talking to myself, but you can also think in your head rather than talking to God. There are lots of different ones you can do, and some people prefer some to others, but one that I probably do the most is just describing what I'm doing, which sounds really simple. But for instance, if I'm doing the washing up, I'll describe what I can feel, what I can hear, what I can smell, what I can taste, just basically the senses whilst I'm doing something. And it just helps you to think in that present moment rather than what you've done yesterday or earlier or what you're going to be doing in the future. All you're doing is taking your mind off your other thoughts and carrying on with this. And it's important when you're doing mindfulness not to judge yourself if your mind wanders off, and to not get annoyed at yourself, but to just notice it and then get back to the mindfulness activity that you were doing. I think that it can be really hard for us to cope with overthinking and with our emotions. And if you get particularly distressed, then tolerating your distress can help by doing some self-soothing activities. And again, this will be different for different people, but it might be focusing on the senses again. It might be something like watching a candle or smelling a candle, looking at flowers, smelling flowers, having a warm bath, having a massage, anything that's going to soothe you. You might just do it for 5 or 10 minutes just to calm yourself, and to after that you may be ready to then deal with these emotions you felt, or you just need a bit of time to not think about anything. You might put your favourite worship song on, or just your favourite song, and that can be really helpful. So those are some of my tips.
Great. As a Christian, how would you say your faith in Jesus has helped you going through all this?
I'm certainly not going to pretend that God has made this a lot easier for me. Often people can think that Christians have it easy because they've got God on their side. That's obviously not the case, but I do think that he's really helped me through these struggles and through these difficult times. There have been particular places in the Bible that I've been able to reread and help me with this. In particular, 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 3-9 talks all about Jesus as our living hope. And it's just amazing reading every time and feeling something different, learning something different, and being reassured that we have this hope that our life does have a purpose, and we have this hope that we have this inheritance of eternal life with God because we love him. And that is encouraging. Every time I would read that, it would not take away my struggles, but give me a hope that things were going to improve, and that hopefully God would work something good out of this situation. There were times during my ME where I could not see how any of this would be doing any good for me or for anybody else, and how God could use this situation in any way was beyond me. But looking back now, I have been equipped with skills to be able to share with people about mental health and about struggles that we may face and about emotions. And although I obviously would have rather not had a chronic illness, it's really helped me to be able to bond with people and share experiences and try and help people, particularly with my young people that I work with at the church. It's yeah, things have worked out for good that I didn't expect, and sometimes we need to have got over those things to be able to see that. It can be hard in the struggle to notice that, but again, it's that hope that in the future we will know that something good may come out of this. And that's something that we want to try and always remember, that God has got our back, that we can have this constant conversation with him, and if we're in a time where we're completely struggling, we can still have that conversation with him, just the same as if we're doing really, really well. Prayer can be such a powerful tool for us to just have a constant relationship with God. To keep your friendships going, you need to talk to them and you need to spend time with them. So we need to do that with God. And listening to worship music is really helpful for me, particularly times where I didn't really have the words to pray, because a lot of the words in worship songs are prayers to God. So that would be something that I would also focus on, which I would recommend.
Well, thank you for being so honest. If someone watching this is really having a difficult time with their own emotions at the moment, what would you want to say in closing to help them?
Okay, I would say try and find someone that you can feel comfortable talking to. If you feel like talking to a professional can help, then definitely try and find a counsellor perhaps, or ring your GP and talk to them about how you're feeling, and they can maybe signpost you into something that can help. There's lots of good resources out there, and hopefully you feel like you've got a friend or family member that won't judge you and will just be able to listen to you. That would also be a really good thing for you to do. I don't pretend to be a professional of emotions and mental health and things like that, but if you'd like to know more about my experiences with my therapy or with my faith journey, really do feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you and listen to how you're feeling and any struggles that you might have. So hopefully this video has been slightly useful to you and has helped out. Feel free to share with anybody that you think it might be helpful for. And thanks for listening.